Welcome back to Adventures in Biology. Oops, I've moved my screen. That's not too good. That's better. Here I am. So welcome back to Biology Unit 2, Adventures in Reproduction. So we talked about cell replication so far. And this builds on that idea of cell replication because, of course, in larger organisms like ourselves, larger eukaryotes, there's much more to it than just creating a new cell and off you go. There's much more complex. So let's have a look at some of these complexities. So asexual reproduction is very much like what we looked at with cell replication, particularly binary fission. It's one cell becomes two, although this is a little bit different. So binary fission in prokaryotes is simply that idea of one cell becoming two. We've got two new individuals and off they go. We're looking particularly here at asexual reproduction in much larger organisms, creating new copies of themselves. Again, we have the same problem that we have with binary fission. These are genetically identical. And it's a huge disadvantage in the environment if the environment changes. It's fine if there's no stress in the environment. It's quite a quick way to populate. And we use it a lot in agriculture and horticulture to get crops together very fast. But it makes them very susceptible to a disease because all of them are identical, they all get wiped out. Anyway, I just digress there. So we know about binary fission. We talked about that in the previous video. Multiple fission occurs in some organisms. Again, they're not prokaryotic, are they? What are algae? What are protists? I suppose they're eukaryotic. They're not our cells. They're not mammals and plants. They're in algae. But they can actually create multiple copies of themselves, not just one, and grow that way, which is an interesting way of doing things, but of course they're genetically identical. Something we see in this small multicellular organism called a hydra is budding. So we've got here the adult, and it's growing a new version of itself, which will break off eventually, and we'll have two hydra. And it's the way hydra go about reproduction. Not the only animal that does it, or any hydra's animal. Yeah, hydra's animal. Not the only small multicellular organism which does it. There are a number, and it's a simple way of going about creating new copies. You don't need a partner. You can respond quickly to really favourable environmental conditions and produce lots of other members of your team. But again, genetically identical, which is that ongoing issue. We see fragmentation in two ways: fragmentation in animals and fragmentation in plants. We talk about fragmentation in plants separately because it's a bit different in a sense. But the classic, of course, is good old sea star. You break an arm off and grow a new sea star. It repairs itself and replaces the broken leg, and the broken leg becomes another member. So you can see this one here. It's probably broken off this sea star, but it's already starting to grow new legs. If it's a five-arm sea star, this one's already repaired the damage. So it may not be the same organism, of course, but it's that sort of idea. We talk about spore formation. Spores occur in ferns and mosses in particular, and they're produced by mitosis. So they're like a seed, but they're not seeds. And they've been produced by mitosis, not by meiosis, which we haven't talked about yet. So they're diploid, and they produce a whole new life. And so the life cycle of the fern, which evolved prior to flowering plants, and the mosses, and liverworts and a few other plants, are quite different, and they use these spores. Bacteria often and fungi often use spores as well for the same purpose. They're diploid cells, so they're not seeds as we know them, and they have a slightly different life cycle. Of course, when we start talking about plants, one of the classics is this idea of fragmentation. I can quite deliberately fragment a plant. I can take cuttings, and the cuttings are then used to grow new versions. This looks like rosemary. So someone's taken a whole lot of cuttings off their rosemary bush, and they're preparing them here to plant out. That's producing growth hormone to get the roots growing, and then they'll just plop those in the ground here in the potting mix and grow them on. I've got quite a few plants growing by cuttings at the moment. I love growing plants by cuttings and filling up my garden beds. A very cheap way of doing it. There's a natural way of plants quickly establishing themselves, and again, they're genetically identical. So you don't want to overdo it. Parthenogenesis is a really interesting one because this occurs in simple animals. Some birds, fish, and reptiles are known to do parthenogenesis. So the egg in the female isn't fertilized, there's no sperm present, but the female produces offspring anyway. So of course these are clones. They're identical to their mum. So the same problem, they're genetically identical. But in the absence of mates in males in the environment, then it's possible for these guys to still reproduce. There are some species where if there's not enough males, some of the females become males. There's always really strange little variations in some of these lower evolved creatures that allow them to continue in hostile environments. I'm going to keep moving, so it's going to take me more than 15 minutes if I'm not careful. So let's move on to sexual reproduction. Sex starts in the water, of course. So I was going too fast. Sex is about mixing two gametes. So it's bringing two lots of chromosomes together. So mum's chromosomes, dad's chromosomes, making a new individual who is not genetically identical to either. And there's the great advantage. Disadvantage, you've got to find a partner. But the great advantage here is you've got a genetically unique outcome. And so that variation develops in the population and you can survive environmental stresses more easily. And evolution really does rely on our ability to mix our genes. And sex allows us to do that. Life on Earth started in the water. So the female produce her eggs, lay them somewhere, male come along, cover them in sperm, after some sort of mating ritual, the two would get together, and then they'd swim off. And the eggs and sperm would do their own thing and develop into little, tadpoles in the case of frogs, earlier life forms, and slowly develop into the full fish or full frog or coral and move on as an adult. To do this, of course, you produce billions of eggs and billions of sperm, and some of them work. It's hit and miss, but it's in water, and you can just do whatever you like. That's not the problem of what I'm trying to say. There are cycles when this happens, but you can produce large quantities quite quickly. So we still see this in fish, frogs, coral. So I've used those as our little photographs here to accentuate things. This orange stuff here is fish egg. So the female's laying her egg. The male will come along and he'll lay his sperm on top. Normally a nice little quiet spot in the stream somewhere. So the move to land led us to start thinking about, well, hang on, can't do that. Although the frogs deliberately went back to water to breed. So they came onto land and they live on land most of their life, but they'll have sex in water so that they can still have young. The male here has mounted the female because it's clasping. Because clasping, he's causing her to release her eggs, and he releases sperm onto them. There's no penis for internal fertilization here. But obviously on land we need to develop a whole lot of new organs to cope with this idea of internal fertilization. And so in the male human, we have a penis, and that penis is a really important part of this process because the firm, erect penis allows the sperm to be delivered inside the female where it's wet, and those sperm can then swim and find the egg, which is swimming towards them down the fallopian tube. So there's the glands of the penis here, which is full of nerve endings. Same tissue you would find in a female. So this is the clitoris in the female, so the glands in the male. There's this tissue here full of erectile material, tends to make the labia in the female. There's this tube here that runs all the way around and has two jobs. Urine, so at this point in time we're calling it the urethra. From here we're talking about it as the vas deferens, and they meet around the prostate gland. And so it can carry both urine and sperm and semen. We have seminal vesicle and prostate gland, and we haven't got a cowpus gland. There's an axillary gland there. There's no cowpus, but all these things add fluids to the mix to keep the sperm safe and to give them energy for their journey of finding the egg. All this tissue here engorges with blood to make the penis hard for sex. We've got the testes where the sperm are produced, so the gonad, the testes, and the epididymis carries, this little part of the epididymis here matures those sperm, and they're stored there, and then the vas deferens delivers those to the penis for ejaculation. And the scrotum's used to hold the testes away from the body, try and keep them at the right temperature. They're about 34 degrees Celsius for good sperm production. And so again, the scrotum is part of what we now see in the females as labia. So in the female, Here's the nerve endings, the glands, with the labia, which are deliberately there to close over this space. There's two sets of labia, interior and exterior. Excuse me. Which keep infection out of the vagina, which is important because the vagina, of course, the vagina, of course, leads up into the uterus where the baby is going to grow if you're going to have a baby. And that needs to be kept clean and free of bacteria and infection for the baby's sake. So the penis is inserted into the vagina, delivers sperm around the cervix. Those sperm will then start swimming. It's a hostile environment. These are cells that don't belong. So the female's going to try and kill them with her immune system. But also her vagina is slightly acidic, and the sperm arrive in a slightly alkaline environment. Hence all those chemicals that are added to them to try and keep them safe from this. But only the healthiest survive. Oops, there it is. And these go swimming up through the uterus and into the fallopian tubes, or oviducts. So to meet an egg and create fertilization, it has to happen here in the fallopian tube. And the ovary, the female gonad, is where these eggs are released from. And they travel down there. What else we need to worry about? That's probably enough now. We can talk in more detail in class, but I'm going to run out of time if I'm not careful. So, plants do the same thing. Flowering plants have sex organs. And often the flower has both male and female. So in this case, we've got this area here on top of the style, which is sticky, and the pollen grains stick to that and they work their way down into the ovary. So the pollen comes here from the anther. So it's the gonad of the plant. It's the other gonad of the plant, the ovary. And these little specks here are the ovules, or eggs if you like, so pollen's sperm. And they work their way down into here. And this object here, the ovary, becomes a fruit. So apples are plant ovaries full of their seeds. So they're also doing sex. Now, some plants have male and female flowers. Some plants have male and female plants, and you have both present. In others, you have both present, so the male and female parts. But sometimes the male is ready first and releases his pollen before the female, the star, is prepared to take that pollen in, just to stop self-fertilizing. And other plants don't care, and they self-fertilize quite happily. So there's a whole range of things here. With these petals being so tall, this would be the sort of flower which probably relies on insects. If the petals were shorter, below the level of the pollen and style, then that suggests something that's wind pollinated, allowing the wind to move the sperm around. And we'll go for time. Ooh, going well. So this is all about meiosis, basically. We're going to make gametes. Gametes are sperm and egg, or ovules and pollen, and they're made in the ovaries and testes. And this is an adaptation or an adaptation of mitosis to make haploid cells. So I want 4 cells, each with 1 set of chromosomes. So when they get together, I've got 2 sets of chromosomes. Okay, so normal process of mitosis occurs. So cell replication goes through its normal process: growth 1, synthesis, growth 2. We do prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, but we don't do psychokinesis. We loop back to prophase again. So I've now got 2 cells with 2 lots of chromosomes. They loop back to the start of prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, and now I've got 4 cells. So I do PMAT twice, and that achieves my outcome, 4 cells. Oh, I'm going to keep moving because we're going to run out of time. But things can go wrong. Actually, I might just jump over these. Oh no, crossing over. That's what we're talking about. Crossing over occurs. We talked about the fact that, in ours there's 92 chromosomes at one point where all these things mix together. And so it's quite common for the bits to break off and reassort. And that's good. It creates variation. We don't mind that. But sometimes we get polysomy. We end up with too many chromosomes at one end. And so in the case of Down syndrome, which we talked about in class the other week, we end up with 3 number 21s. And it changes the phenotype of the individual. And in Down syndrome, we see short stature, poor muscle tone, delayed intellectual development. That tells us number 21 chromosome has those genes on it, which is quite interesting in itself. Oh, a few seconds left. Polyploidy is unusual in animals like ourselves. It does occur in plants where